Bob, we talked about this last time, and I wonder, Father, I'm curious what you would say about it. But Bob, I'm just recalling the conversation we had with Sean, where we articulated that some of these dynamics seem to be the good, at least. If we can find the good, it's the culture's been so stripped of the spiritual worldview that is a real thing. And so any kind of thought or consideration that that's going on feels like life in a way. It's like a sip of water in the desert because it's like you're coming back to who you are. So whenever anybody has like I've traveled over to the other side and I've come back, it's like, really? Is it real? All that stuff's real? And so I think in some ways it's this desire for the fullness of our creation taken into, Hollywood. It's like in some ways that's what Hollywood leverages the whole time, is some of these dimensions and aspects of things we've forgotten, things that were ultimately made for, that we want to be sensationalized because we want to, we want to get into it. Everybody's human. As humans, we're all physical and spiritual. The quickest thing to forget is the spiritual, because it's not, quote unquote, in your face like the physical is all the time, but it's really there. So, oh, tell me about it. I forgot. Ooh, it's there. It's real. Bob, what is that? Do you resonate
Yeah, I
with
think
that?
there's a part of, since the Enlightenment, and particularly as I was coming of age, there was a secularism and an intellectualism that kind of denied the supernatural. And so I think in the rediscovery of the supernatural, there's a recognition that, well, if evil is real, and it's not just a fabric of my imagination, then the angelic must be real, then God must be real. It's like it's moving into that space that I think Hollywood has captured. I think the YouTube exorcism has captured. There's a real interest. But I think it's also that would be the positive side, is the recognition of, yeah, there is a supernatural reality and we're in a battle. That this life isn't just neutral. There's a spiritual battle here. I think the negative part of that is what Father Boniface is addressing, which is it gets to be uh, a horror movie, if you will. It gets to be our imagination caught up in a reality. And then, as we've talked about already, the fearfulness around that and uh, the looking for ways of being in control when we feel out of control because of fear, that gets to be the negative, I think. And then we get obsessed. Talk about obsession. We get obsessed with evil rather than, and, to use your terms, oppressed by evil, rather than possessed by God, rather than believing everything the church has taught, which is all acknowledgement of supernatural, and living in that direction. We start to live in the other direction. We start to get our fascination with evil rather than our fascination, fascination's the wrong word, rather than uh, adoration with God. That's how I would.
What do you think, Father?
Um, I'm going to wander into Dominican territory that's dangerous
Ooh.
because I don't know it well enough. But I think that supernatural is actually not the correct term. I think supernatural is a matter of divine and grace. So angels and demons are actually preternatural, and they would be invisible realities, and they would
Okay.
be pure spirits. But anyway, I don't know how much difference that makes, but the supernatural is really what we receive from the divine. So angels are in a state of grace, so they have become supernatural, you might say. Demons are not,
Mm-hmm.
and so they are not. But
Yeah,
yeah, invisible
yeah,
realities, the spiritual world, I think those are good things to talk about. And it's part of trying to characterize what is the spiritual world? What is this invisible world? What does this consist of? And our imagination, the thing that Hollywood has done is they keep turning it into material things.
Yeah.
We have we make up our own images for angels and demons, for invisible realities, which is fine in one way. How else do we engage them? We engage them using our imagination. That's not a bad thing in itself. But what is a spiritual nature, a purely spiritual being? And I've started to think in terms of like, to try and put it in something that we have some experience of, rather than, that's again the problem is we don't have an experience of angels and demons. We're trying to like map those onto something that we know, and then we do it in weird ways, and Hollywood unhelpfully describes ways that that happens. So, but something we do have an experience of is relationships. And so a relationship is a spiritual reality. You can't see it. We know what it is. We have a sense of how it grows. It's not either of the two people that are involved in it. It's something in addition to them. And of course, we have this kind of fullest expression in God himself with the Holy Spirit. And I think also another kind of spiritual reality that we acknowledge and can experience and have some logic around is the idea of story. That we all have a narrative, a story, which again, kind of obviously involves us. And yet it has kind of a life outside of us. And we're sort of learning, we're receiving our story and living our story and perceiving our story and trying to live that out more fully. And it would be sort of like when a word enters into time, it becomes a story. And so this again is kind of a divine concept that as the God has expressed everything through the word, in some sense, everything has a story as he's just played out the word in time, and a particular story, a divine love story. He is the divine word who is with the Father from the beginning and is held in the Father's bosom. And so anyway, like, what are spiritual realities? So I would say relationship and story, and maybe even because the one story is a story of relationship, every story is relational. Every divine story is relational. And so maybe you get kind of those two things coming together. But then so those are sort of spiritual realities. And can we map angels and demons onto that framework a little bit more? And then that gives us a reference point. Like, I know how a relationship goes. I know how a relationship breaks. I know how a story goes. I know how a story can get twisted up around a false narrative. I know how a story can be freed from a false narrative. And I know the way that that impacts my human person in all of those things in a way that I can then engage with my intuition and my reason and my real experience, rather than this kind of strange otherworldly reality that I have no access to except what the exorcists tell me or Hollywood tells me or some other kind of fantastic stories. So that's been a little bit of my work to try and get a little logic, experiential logic around these things. And I'm still exploring these ideas, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about them.
I know for me, my mind went to trying to articulate the narrative, the story, the relationship with regard to the various perspectives that people have of deliverance. There's no questioning how popular this has become. It's become very, very popular, and for I think mixed. There's good in that, and there's not good in that. And what I think is actually helpful in all these domains is to really try to have eyes to see, because if I can actually see the truth in it, the fullness of reality in it, then I can navigate it. And I hear that's what you're doing there, Father, is you're trying to take a reality that isn't easily articulated when you're nuancing it intentionally and doing it in such a way that it's helpful to the Christian life, as opposed to subtly distracting from what's primary in the Christian life. And that dynamic, the subtle movement away from what is good, to me is the ploy of the enemy. It is what leads to disintegration, but it is not easy to always catch. That's why he's the deceiver, and he's quote unquote good at what he does. And so one of the things that Hollywood suggests, if you do X and it's really bad, expect the flying goat creature to jump on your car, like, and then here it goes. And now the Hollywood movie's alive. Um, and I think what the subtle narrative, which we're not trying, which we don't realize there, is that Hollywood's job or story is to get attention, to leverage it so as to generate income. But I think that's a fair summary of the narrative there. Your attention is the most important thing that I can get access to, so let me do things that get access to that. I wonder if that same dynamic is something that transcends Hollywood, because attention is also a critical part of relationship. If I'm being paid attention to, if someone pays attention to me, it blesses me. So we see this in the imagery that the church uses. Excuse me. The imagery that the church uses with regard to the face of God, the countenance, his countenance, him looking at me. So again, what I'm trying to do there is just nuance the stuff that I think's under the surface that everybody just doesn't examine, that actually has big impact in all of these domains. So what's the story of the people, Hollywood, and we're just creating a camp here. It's a bit of a straw man argument, but anyway, the narrative that's being believed there, and I think some of the verbiage in that narrative is around, don't go in there, it'll kill you. Only let me go in there, whoever the me is. And then I'll go in there and come back out and tell you what you need to do so that you'll be okay. And that narrative is a very old story. That is a very common story. For millennia, people have been, using and leveraging this story. And Jesus blew that up. Like he often blew that particular narrative apart. Maybe I'm getting too technical, but I feel like these things matter. The way I put it this morning, actually, when I was just thinking, was it's the assumptions that we make that we don't ever realize we're making that actually orient and direct us into particular pathways. And if we're not conscious of these things, we start walking down a path, not even realizing how it's impacting us. So I like your language of relationship and story. It's very accessible, but I love how it has a mysterious element to it, which can be aggravating, and you want to get away from it and make it more tangible.
Yeah, and then to complete the thought a little bit around, an angel is a messenger. What do messengers do? They carry stories between relationships. And so I think there's an expression of the spiritual world that, angels are the ones that carry truth in relationships, true stories there, and they're directing in some sense. I've been praying a lot with this idea of our guardian angel guards our story. It's like, so then you can take another step up and you can say, actually, your story is so important. God has created you for a definite purpose, to quote the new doctor of the church, John Henry Newman. And that's so important to God that he entrusts that purpose to a celestial being. That angel knows your story and guards your story. And then it's like a director of a play who holds the plot. So he knows what the plot is, and then he's trying to get the actor to live out the story. And he does that by influence, not by, he does that by influence. And so we see this beautiful, if you accept all of that, I mean, I don't know how firmly I can prove all of that. There's a bit of speculation there, but I think it shows in a beautiful way the ways that our angel serves us